Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be my very first video. This is the first video on the channel on YouTube, which is going to basically go over why there are issues with the SCP Foundation on Roblox and why, in general, there seems to be a lot of confusion about the genre itself and a lot of other concepts. It's also kind of going to function a bit as a rant video because I genuinely think there are some things that foundations do completely wrong and I think they need to be addressed. As someone who's been in the foundation, the SCP Foundation community for several years, I would like to formally explain that there are some things out there that I understand this topic is going to upset some people, especially people who do SCPF groups. They love the genre and whatever else, but I'm gonna really break out some harsh truths here that you're not gonna like. Um, so I'm gonna split this video up into different parts, and I'll talk about different topics as we go ahead and we look into different things. So first thing I want to make very clear is this video is not meant to offend anybody in any way, shape, or form. If it does offend you, sorry to say, but I don't know what else to say to you, but you probably are doing some of these things. But like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I take things very seriously in relation to this stuff, and I think that the topics covered on this channel should be relevant to the subject at hand. So, without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so what is the SCP Foundation on Roblox? The SCP Foundation on Roblox is a fandom and a genre on Roblox that basically fulfills the purpose of the SCP Foundation, the SCP Foundation wiki, and is based around the lore. A lot of people do bend the lore in their own ways, but generally it comes down to the same concept. You are a Class D, you get tested on, there are researchers, and there are combatant departments such as security and MTF, whatever else. The concept remains the same. It's pretty much unchanging for years, and it has remained the same for years on Roblox. Period. There isn't a lot really like that changes. I suppose there are some playable SCPs, but I just want to say that there is literally no originality in this genre. Everybody tries to copy each other, and there's a hell of a lot of toxicity because you have intelligence agencies and internal security departments trying to effectively screw over other groups and their departments as respective. It's not really acceptable. This is a Lego game, guys. I know you might be like, "Oh, he's saying it's a Lego game," but I want to make something clear here. You might think that's not a Lego game, but all reality, it's just a platform. We're here to have fun. We're not here to screw over each other's groups. So realistically, guys, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't partake in the behavior. Don't just don't get involved. Don't go into other groups thinking that like you're high and mighty and no one can touch you and whatever else. Like it's just don't and you're not cool if you leak guidelines. Come on, guys, you're not cool if you go and you leak guidelines. I'm sure BlueConX. Shout out to BlueConX, by the way. You check out his vids, check out his channel, help him grow as well. He's also pretty knowledgeable on the subject. He's put a few videos out that may correspond to mine. Um, when it comes to the SCPF genre, it's just very toxic. It's an environment that causes problems. There's a lot of issues in the genre as well. I've been here for years myself, and I can tell you, there's literally there's no enthusiasm anymore. Like some people do want to make their own SCPS, fair dues to them. They might have a cool site and all, but the concept generally stays the same. And because the concept is unchanging and stays the same, this genre is just bloated. There's so many groups that you can do the same thing in. So they're all pretty much butt heads, and there's a lot of rivalry. There's a lot of aggression between the groups. There's a lot of very nasty things going on. Like people are getting doxxed, people's IP address are getting leaked. People are going to way more extreme extent, even so far as to hire exploiters to exploit other groups. That goes on in this genre. It's a big issue. There's a lot of toxicity as well. There's fights over tech. There is a lot of developer hogging as well, where people will purposely pay a developer thousands more just to make it very difficult for other people to get a hold of any developers. It's a very very big issue. SCP Foundations on Roblox have a lot of inherent issues as a result of that. But to be completely and utterly frank, it really depends on how you're going to look at it. The next part I'm going to describe, I've already gone over the first part where I talked about the foundation itself and what some of the inherent problems are. But next I'm going to talk about what are the lower issues. So lower issues in the foundation, generally it's almost always to do with SCPs and containment. They're always AI. They do the same tests over and over and over again with the scientific department and the class Ds or whatever else. Combatives always end up escorting or recontaining stuff, and that's generally how foundations work. But there's not a lot of anything different with them. Yeah, you have different sites. Yeah, you have different, but the concepts remain heavily the same. Everyone kind of copies directly from SCPF lore, and there's no originality. There's literally no originality at all in foundations these days, unfortunately, and that seems to be for a large portion of the SCPF community on Roblox. It's an issue. It's not great, to be honest. The community has a lot of issues inherently with that. Um, but anyway, the next thing I'm going to talk about is combatants. So I'm going to talk about the toxicity between combatants, Class Ds, and MTF, and let's just also briefly go over the rapid response team and other quote-unquote classified units as well. So security department's job in SCP Foundations is usually to stop Class Ds from rioting or breaching SCPs or whatever else, and they generally sometimes do light recontainment duty. They always are seen generally wearing white and black, and they are the division that gets a lot of bad rep for being unable to aim, because a lot of the SCPF genre tends to use RCL guns, which are based around the principle of bunny hopping and running and hiding and just trying to dodge bullets, when in reality, most cases, you should just realistically use better weapon systems like first person or third person. Over the shoulder, they're much better weapon systems. They do deal with a lot of toxicity between divisions because they can't really complain as much about people's skill gap. There's less of a skill gap. Um, like foundations are not RCLs. Don't care what you say. Don't care if you blast the comment section with that RCL is great. I really don't give a damn. Um, RCL is a dying weapon system in terms of using it on foundations. They're not clans. They're not clans. I don't care what people say. They're not clans. They're not clans at all. And I don't, even if CIs come in and they start bugging you, don't cave to them. Don't do RCL. Just do third person over the shoulder, first person. Ignore their complaining. It puts everyone on a level playing field, and it just means that they need to be smart about how to move. So without further ado, let's go over why CDs and SDs and MTF have issues. So Class Ds have issues with SDs because SDs and Class Ds generally are stuck in the detention center, and if the Class Ds pass the red line, they usually get shot or beaten, and that generates a very toxic environment overall, because Class Ds are people. At the end of the day, they are people. They are people who want to play the game. They spend money on game passes or whatever, and they like to shoot a SD, and then they teabag them, or they get very toxic, or they engage in very aggressive behavior, and they just make it security lives miserable for the sake of it because they think it's fun, and that's not acceptable. It's very toxic. It's not a fun environment to be in. That's why a lot of people immediately go to MTF, so they don't have to deal with the Class Ds, because they don't have to talk to them. They don't have to communicate with them in any way, and that actually makes it worse when they're ignored. Especially groups that have the silence rule, which is basically that security can't speak to Class Ds no matter what. That's just ridiculous in my opinion. I don't know whoever made that rule, but to be honest, it's not a good idea for anyone to come up with that concept. Ignoring people actually makes it worse, especially with a situation where there's no communication going on, since it's a game at the end of the day. Mobile Task Force and Security Department are always miles apart from each other, because the MTF usually looks down on the SD, and the SD think the MTF act very elite, and they think they're very elitist, and that's also an issue. MTF usually are split up into different divisions to do different jobs, like MTF Beta 7 does recontainment, Alpha 1 does guarding, and New 7 is combat. That's usually the general setup for most foundations, although they will have other MTF units as well. but they're the general 3 MTF unit, the most common ones. So basically after that, then you also have to look at other aspects as well. So we looked at a lot of the toxicity, we looked at the issues. Now let's look at the redacted/edgy departments, which cause issues as well. Redacted departments are a joke on Roblox. Don't care what people say. Yeah, maybe if you have ISD and they actually are hidden from plain view and they're actually reporting on people's actions to get people in trouble and they actually serve a purpose, yeah, great, have them. But don't have them some edgy red and black task force that is like supposedly more elite than even MTF, and then you take MTF's job and then no one wants to play MTF at all then. Like, you have to remember that departments that take other departments' jobs are inevitably going to cause problems. But people ignore it, and a lot of groups have things like Rapid Response Team, Redacted slash ISD, Task Force, whatever you want to call it, and they just have crazy amounts of combatant units that are never needed. They're never needed, and they cause issues, and people get angry, and there's always issues with clashing departmental command and everything else. Jurisdiction, don't even bother with jurisdiction half the time. Trying to do jurisdiction stuff, it doesn't work when you're in a small environment. You want your combatants to actually enjoy the game and have access to everything and not have all these quote unquote elite units that do the same thing, because that will inevitably lead to problems. That's another issue with the SCPF community. They don't seem to understand this. Again, BlueCon did a good video explaining some of this stuff. Then onto intelligence agencies. Okay, intelligence agencies, why are you in other groups? Like, what purpose do you have leaking people's guidelines and going and Aing on the group? Like, what are you doing? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to actually take out your competition, take out your competitors? Because that seems what you're doing. You're not doing it. This is past the edgy role play now. You're actually trying to screw over other groups. That's unacceptable in my eyes, and I think that you're a sad individual if you think that's acceptable. But this is a lot what the SPF community does. They will go so far as to dox people and think it's funny and engage in highly illegal activities just for clout, and that's also unacceptable as well. That's wrong in every way, and you shouldn't be doing it. If you have an IA that's spying on people who are actually a threat to your group, okay, fair enough. That's kind of, in my books, that would be okay. If you had genuine people who are a danger to your group and you want to keep an eye on them and see what they're doing, or people are blacklisted to make sure they don't get on alts or whatever and sneak into your group, or that kind of stuff, that's, in my opinion, that's okay, because they have a function then. They're not just sitting there doing nothing. That's grand in my book. But if you have them on site wearing edgy trench coats and big fedoras and all this stuff, looking big and intimidating, they're pointless. Like, they're supposed to be undercover, so why are you dressing them like detectives if you want them to actually be hidden or do any kind of private investigation? It's not great. It's a terrible idea to have your guys. And I know someone's going to be like, oh, well, they're edgy and they look cool. Being edgy and looking cool really doesn't matter when they have a function and it's supposed to actually remain hidden and actually remain quiet. It's the same as ISD. You want to keep them under the wraps, so no one kind of asks questions, unless you have uniformed agents that can be approached and problems reported to them, kind of like an ethics committee in a way. So that would actually work in ways as well. And then onto the ethics committee. So Department of Regulations, ethics, whatever you want to call them. Let's just talk about this. Department of Ethics or Ethics Committee, Department of Regulation, whatever you want to call them. They make rules, okay? They make rules that people have to follow, or they break them and they get punished. Ethics Committee, they basically do what high ranks are supposed to do, and they do it independently from the high ranks. The problem is they can get corrupted really badly, and if they do, it kind of can spell curtains for your group or your SCP you're trying to run, so you have to be careful of that. When it comes to things like that, I'd be very, very careful about that type of thing. Like, if you're talking ethics committees, I'd really just leave stuff up to your HRs and kind of decide, do you really need an ethics committee? If you need one, you can make one, but just make sure that they all communicate with each other and they all get the job done so there's no issues. And make sure that they have a good rep with at least the HRs so it's not an issue. Department of Regulations is the exact same problem. Just keep an eye on it. Make sure it doesn't get corrupt and make sure it doesn't have heavy issues. Um, so basically, after ethics committee, then you got your what? Your trying to think. So generally, you'll get your GOIs, groups of interest. Now, this is another end of toxicity. You'll have groups of interest. Groups of interest do kind of keep foundations alive, but make sure you don't let your combatants go into them because your combatants will just always be on their team and they'll never get on your teams and it'll cause issues because you'll have basically all your best combatants will go over there to take out their frustrations on SD or whatever. And that's not a good thing either. You might think they're letting off steam, but they're really just frustrating everybody else, so don't allow them to do it. If you're going to have groups of interest, make sure they're independent and make sure that you monitor them because groups of interest can get very toxic. Their relations with combatants can be super toxic and you need to keep an eye on it. If you see that kind of behavior, I'd recommend personally just like nudging them and saying, look, watch the toxicity. It's not supposed to be a toxic environment for your guys to work in. If it is, there's going to be issues. Just make sure you remind them, keep them in check. Groups like Chaos Insurgency are notorious for toxicity in the genre. No offense to them, but they are notorious for toxicity. They trash talk combatants a lot. They will think that they're on top of everybody else. And generally speaking, it can be a very, very frustrating experience for other people who have to cope with this. Like when it comes to this kind of stuff, you just want to stay on top of it, you know. Like you want to make sure that if you're running an SCPF group, you want to make sure that no one takes each other's roles, but at the same time, everyone has a place. A lot of groups have this issue. I've been the victim of it as well. Chaos Insurgencies though, just like make sure that some of their demands, if they're reasonable, get listened to. But like if they're asking for stuff like give our weapons 20 more damage or whatever, and they're they're balanced, don't listen to that. That's just toxicity, and it should be ignored, and they should be kindly told to beep off. Um, like realistically speaking, GOIs they can add a lot to your group, but like just again keep an eye on them. They're really important that you want to keep an eye on them because they will be the source of a lot of your toxicity. Um, as for your other divisions, actually, yeah, I think we need to talk about other divisions as well. Um, other divisions, engineering and technical, your usual, maybe sometimes even administrative department or management, or you have other divisions like external affairs. External affairs is grand, just don't let them go crazy. If you want them, use them as a tool of communication. They're great for it. If you have good people who are good speakers, very helpful. As for your engineering technical, make sure they have stuff to do on site, or there's no point to them. If they don't have anything to do, they don't have anything to repair or whatever, there's no point in even having them. They're just a role play division that's pointless and they have nothing to do of interest and they'll never get on. Medical department, same thing. Medical department, always make sure you have stuff scripted and you get stuff actually sorted out for them so they have stuff to do. They are also vital. Combat medics is a tried and tested idea, but sometimes it can take activity away from medical department. So just make sure you balance that, or you consider the effects of bringing in a division that may take roles or responsibility away from another division. That's pretty much everything. I think this covers almost everything for this video. If you have any questions, comments, queries, ask in the comment section below. And I think that will be everything for my first video. Comment in the comments if you want more content like this.